Hi, Year 11s and 12s. This is our second video in talking about species, communities and ecosystems. Again, this is an IB topic, so if you're from the SACE curriculum, this is not a video that you need to note down. In this PowerPoint here, or in this video here, we're going to be talking about modes of nutrition, so talking about autotrophs and heterotrophs, etc. So let's begin. The first thing that we're going to talk about is autotrophic and heterotrophic nutrition. Okay, so autotrophs, we're talking about things like plants and algae, are organisms that can make their own compounds, or carbon compounds, or organic compounds, from carbon dioxide and other simple inorganic substances. So they're taking inorganic substances in, and they're converting them into organic compounds in their bodies. They're creating their own food. So trophic is almost talking about feeding, auto, making your own. Autotrophic makes their own food as such. Okay, whereas a heterotrophic organism over here, like this goat we've got in the diagram here, these are generally animals, okay, and they're obtaining their carbon compounds by eating other organisms. So in this case, the goat is eating the autotrophs, and it's obtaining the organic compounds that the autotrophs have formed in their body, taking them into its body, and digesting them. There are some unicellular organisms that are both autotrophs and heterotrophs. We call them mixotrophs. An example of that is Euglena gracilis, which possesses chloroplasts, but it also feeds on dead matter. So it's both an autotroph and a heterotroph, and we call that a mixotroph. Okay. We do have to be able to classify species as autotrophs, consumers, detrivores, saprotrophs, based on how they eat. So when it comes to autotrophy, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So autotrophy is animals that can synthesize organic molecules from inorganic sources themselves, so they're self-feeding. We've got two different types. We've got ones that go through photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. So ones that go through photosynthesis are called photoautotrophs. Ones that go through chemosynthesis are called chemoautotrophs. Photoautotrophs are ones that make organic compounds with energy they get from the sun. So photo meaning light, they're getting all that energy from the light. Whereas chemotrophs are ones that are using organic compounds derived from the oxidation of chemicals. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so that's how we split up autotrophs. In terms of animals being split into consumers, detrivores, or saprotrophs, these are all organisms that obtain their organic molecules from eating other organisms. Consumers ingest organic matter that's living or very recently killed. Detrivores ingest non-living organic matter, detritivores, and whereas saprotrophs will feed on non-living organic matter, so animals that are long dead, and they do this by secreting digestive enzymes and absorbing the products of those enzymes. We'll look at all of these in detail, but this is how you can use this flowchart to separate these different animals or organisms based on the way that they feed. Okay, so first off, let's focus on autotrophs. So almost all plants and algae are autotrophic. Again, that means self-feeding. Okay, in order for them to be self-feeding, they need to have energy to do this. Now, most of the time, most plants and algae would obtain this from sunlight through photosynthesis. But there are a small number of plants and algae that don't actually have chloroplast. Now, chloroplast is the organelle we talked about in ultrastructure of cells, which helps an organism carry out photosynthesis. These organisms that don't have chloroplasts but are still autotrophs will get the energy that they need from the oxidation of inorganic chemicals, and that's called chemosynthesis. Okay. Autotrophs in general will obtain their inorganic substances that they're using to make organic substances from their abiotic environment. Now, abiotic environment just means non-living environment. Okay. When we're talking about nutrients, we're talking about carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. These are all obtained from the air, water, and soil. All of these are very simple inorganic substances. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, like I said, that can be split into consumers, detritivores, and saprotrophs. Consumers, they're heterotrophs that feed on living organisms through ingestion. Consumers will feed off other organisms. Now, those other organisms are either alive or have died recently, generally being killed by the consumer itself. Okay, and generally these consumers are divided into trophic levels. Now, those trophic levels are primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, quaternary consumer, etc. You've looked at all of these in the Year 9 Australian curriculum. Okay, primary consumer is the first consumer. It's generally going to be eating plant matter, which means it's going to be a herbivore. Okay, so herbivore are primary consumers that feed off plant matter. Okay, and we'll just fix that up, feed off of plant matter. Okay, omnivores on the other hand, these are consumers that are going to eat both plant and animal matter. This means that they can be classified as a primary consumer if they're eating plant matter, or they could be higher if they're eating animal matter because they're feeding on the primary consumer or higher. Okay. Carnivores, on the other hand, are consumers that are feeding off animal matter, and they have to be secondary consumer or higher because they're eating only another consumer. Okay. Scavengers are a different type of consumer. They feed on dead and decaying carcasses. Okay. Lastly, we're going to look at detritivores and saprotrophs. So, saprotrophs are a type of heterotroph that obtains organic nutrients from dead organisms from external digestion. Okay, so we're talking about things like mushrooms in this diagram down here, or fungi. Whereas detritivores are heterotrophs that obtain organic nutrients from dead matter, and they digest that matter inside their body. So we're talking things about earthworms here. Okay. A lot of organisms will discard large quantities of organic matter. Okay. Rarely does that matter accumulate. Instead, it's used as nutrition for these detritivores and saprotrophs. Okay. These detritivores will ingest that dead organic matter and digest it inside their bodies, absorbing the nutrients, whereas saprotrophs will secrete digestive enzymes, which will physically break down the dead matter outside of the body, and then they'll digest the products of that once it's been broken down by those enzymes.